public relations. Talk about what it is and some of the tools. If we had that matrix, we had advertising is paid, mass communications. Public relations I had as unpaid mass communications. And the idea with public relations is you're trying to create the impression that the coverage or the message is spontaneous. What's the definition? I should probably get into the definition because that's going to be on the test. Strategic communication process to build mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. So one of the things that makes public relations work, we talked about the product adoption process, and there's the innovators and the early adopters who are actually seeking out information about new and innovative products because that's important to them. So what public relations recognizes is that for some products and for some people, it's not so much I have to put my advertising on you, but you are seeking out what's going on with my company because that's interesting to you. It's news. And the two most common kinds of news that people want to know is new product information and then, of course, damage control. If there's some disaster happens, they want to know what really goes on. And public relations has a higher credibility than advertising because it appears to be unpaid. So, for example, if I have a new product, I might send out a press release just talking about the new product, and if a media outlet picks that up and runs an article based on my press release, it's not going to be a press release from Bruce Company, it's going to be an article on the Huffington Post. And people will believe the Huffington Post more than they'll believe an advertisement from me, although for me to get coverage on the Huffington Post, I had to communicate with somebody who's writing for the Huffington Post, and I had to show them that what I had to say was of interest to their readers. But again, when it works, it's much more persuasive because people see it as more credible than an advertiser-sponsor identified message. And again, it appears to be unpaid, but there is some activity that has to happen in order to make it work. Another common approach to public relations is just publicity. And this is just any activity that gets you unpaid press coverage. So news releases, special events. I think this is one that they did here in the city where they had an aerial dance company that performed on the side of a building that was opening and got television coverage and newspaper coverage about this troupe. And so by having that activity happen and having it be interesting enough to be covered by the local media, I got media coverage for that, which again wasn't sponsored identified, but it was a message that I wanted to get out there. And the way that you measure the success of publicity is what would it have cost to pay for the space that you got. So if you had a 30-second story was run on the local news, how much would it have cost to buy a 30-second spot on the local news? Or if you got coverage on the front page of the second section of the paper, how much would it have cost to have run an ad on the front page of the second section of the paper as a way of determining the effectiveness of your campaign. And then media relations, this is just working with the press. And in the digital age, it is becoming actually easier because in the olden days, when communication was by mail, it was pretty easy for somebody who is a reporter or has a media outlet to isolate themselves and basically filter the messages that they receive. Today, everybody's out there blogging, and you comment on their blogs, and they're actually looking for your feedback. So it's much easier now to develop relationships with people who have audiences because it's just a symbiotic thing. The more people that follow them, the bigger the audience they have, and the higher the quality of their following, the higher the impact they have. So we can develop relationships by commenting on stories, and then when it comes time for me to have something that might be of interest, I have some credibility with the person that I've been following that I might get them to take my story and put it forward for them. So basically, today, you should have a website and on that website should be anything that a journalist looking for a story about your company would want. It should be there. And the idea is that journalists are struggling because the traditional model of newspapers is under fire, so being asked to do a lot more work with a lot fewer resources. So when they're trying to do a story, if they want to find information on your company and it's not there, they might choose another company as opposed to having to pick up the phone or to make an effort to find more information. So if you want to have positive coverage, it's important to have the information that a journalist might want available. Things like company history, products, stories about the people behind the company, because journalists like to write about people, they don't like to write about products. So if there's any good stories in there, maybe some good graphics, maybe some video snippets if you wanted to get news coverage, so that somebody putting together a story would just have to take the stuff that you've already produced and put their name on it. Another kind of public relations is sponsorships. This is where you give resources, financial or other in-kind support, in exchange for being publicly associated with something that other people want to be associated with. The most common areas of sponsorships are sports, higher education, and, well, that's not for-profit area, and arts. And again, I think we talked about this before. It's important to have a good match between the company and the organization you're sponsoring. This is why you tend to see financial investment companies sponsoring golf tournaments, because who watches golf tournaments? Old people with lots of money, right? And if you're not watching golf, obviously either you're not old enough or you don't have enough money. It's kind of like getting context. And if I wanted to sponsor extreme sports, who's my audience? So Red Bull does the, what is it, the Flugentagen, and Mountain Dew sponsors the X Games, and Red Bull has the whole, but the idea is if I want to get the young adventurous, then let me sponsor young adventurous type events.